Hello, grade 7 students. In this video, we're going to talk about respiration, but this time it's part 3. Let's start with respiration in aerial medium. Here we're talking about respiration in aerial medium, meaning that the air around us. What is responsible for the transportation of the respiratory gases? What are these respiratory gases? They are oxygen and carbon dioxide. So what is responsible for the transportation of these gases, oxygen, O2, and carbon dioxide, CO2, in our body? The one responsible for this is the blood. So the blood is responsible for the transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. You have to know that the blood reaching the lungs will be poor in oxygen and is very rich in carbon dioxide. What does this mean? This means that the blood reaching the lungs is poor in oxygen, contain low amount of oxygen, whereas this blood reaching the lungs is going to be rich in carbon dioxide, meaning that containing high amount of carbon dioxide. So this is the blood reaching. So the blood that is coming to the lungs is poor in oxygen gas and rich in carbon dioxide. But wait a minute, the air in the lungs is rich in oxygen. That's why we can use the lungs to breathe. We use oxygen gas. And the air in the lungs is poor in carbon dioxide. So here you have to know that the lungs, they are rich in oxygen gas and they are poor in carbon dioxide. So what happened to the blood when it entered to the lungs? What will happen for the blood when it enters the lungs? Before we ask this question and before we answer this question, let's start with a term that you have to know. What does this mean? It's called diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion is the movement of particles of a substance, or it's a movement of a substance from a medium of high concentration. Or the meaning of high concentration contains high amount of this substance. Let's say high amount of oxygen or high amount of carbon dioxide, or maybe it's high pressure or high volume, or it's high amount, as we said, to a medium of low concentration or low pressure or low volume or low amount in the same substance. For example, movement of oxygen from a medium that contains high amount of oxygen to another medium that contains low amount of oxygen. This process is known by diffusion, where the particle they diffuse. So you have to know these terms. Diffuse, it's the verb, while diffusion, it's the noun. Okay, so you have to differentiate between these. So here is diffusion. Let's have an example and let's discover together what does diffusion mean. Here we have this container containing high amount of red balls. Let's say here we have a high concentration of this balls or high amount of the red balls. So these red balls is going to move from one box or one container to another container. This is known by diffusion. They diffuse from a medium of high concentration to a medium of low concentration, or if you can say of a medium of high amount to a medium of low amount. Here is the medium with high number of the red balls, and this is the medium with low number of red balls. So here they move from the medium of high to the medium of low. This is known by diffusion. So diffusion is the movement of a substance from a medium with high concentration or high amount to the medium of low concentration or low amount. This is the definition of diffusion. To understand this well, let's look at this application. In this application, we have this table. This table is showing the variation of the quantity of oxygen and carbon dioxide in milliliter for each 100 milliliter of blood, the blood entering and the blood leaving. So this table is showing the quantity of oxygen in milliliter and the quantity of carbon dioxide in milliliter in the blood entering the lungs and the blood leaving the lungs. So here, blood entering and blood leaving, we have to compare them with the same gas. Here, quantity of oxygen in the blood entering the lungs is 15 milliliter, which is less than the quantity of oxygen in the blood leaving the lungs, which is 20. So here we can deduce that oxygen moves from a medium of high concentration to a medium of low concentration. So the blood leaving the lungs, it takes oxygen with it. So the oxygen will move from the lungs to the outside. It moves from the lungs toward the blood. Whereas for carbon dioxide, what will happen? Carbon dioxide, the blood entering the lungs contains 53 milliliter for every 100 milliliter of blood of carbon dioxide. This is greater than that in the blood leaving the lungs, which contains only 49 milliliter. So how can you explain this? We can explain this that the carbon dioxide, it diffuses from where to where? It diffuses from a medium that contains high amount of carbon dioxide, which is the blood, toward the medium that contains low amount of carbon dioxide, which is the lung. They ask you to interpret the results in the table showing the composition. What the meaning of the composition, the components of the blood entering and leaving. Here, talking about the composition of the blood, oxygen and carbon dioxide. Before we move, let's move to interpret. What is interpret? It's analyze plus an indication. Okay, so before we start, you have to know that interpret, it's analysis plus an indication. So the blood entering the lungs contains less oxygen, 15 milliliter, than the blood leaving, which is 20 milliliter. What does this indicate? This indicates that the oxygen diffuses, you heard the word, diffuses from the lungs medium that is rich in oxygen in O2 gas to the blood, which is poor in O2 gas. So from now on, you have to know that oxygen gas, it diffuses from the lungs, which is the medium rich in O2, to the blood, which is the medium that is poor in O2. For carbon dioxide, the blood entering the lungs contains more carbon dioxide, 53 milliliter, which is more than 49. So what does this indicate? This indicates that carbon dioxide diffuses from where? From a medium, from a side that contains high amount of carbon dioxide, which is the blood. This is the blood rich in CO2. What the meaning of rich in CO2? Meaning that it contains high amount of CO2 to the lungs that contains low amount of CO2. Okay, low amount of CO2. We can use, instead of this, we can use poor in CO2. So rich and poor. So from now on, you have to know that carbon dioxide gas, it diffuses from the blood that's rich in carbon dioxide to the lungs that is poor in carbon dioxide. So here the gas exchange at the level of the lungs. This is the gaseous exchange. Whenever I ask describe the gaseous exchange at the level of the lungs, you have to say that oxygen gas, as we said before, diffuses from the lungs, medium rich in oxygen, to the blood, medium that's poor in oxygen. Whereas carbon dioxide gas diffuses from the blood, that is rich in carbon dioxide, to the lungs, that is poor in carbon dioxide. These one you have to study them because you're going to use them a lot in indications and in conclusions. So these are very important notes. You have to study them from now on. You have to know this, that the oxygen gas diffuses. What the meaning of diffuses? Moving from a medium of high concentration to a medium of low concentration of the same substance. So oxygen gas diffuses from the lungs, that's rich in oxygen, to the blood, which is poor in oxygen, whereas carbon dioxide, which is the opposite, diffuses from the blood, that is rich in carbon dioxide, to the lungs, that's poor in carbon dioxide. So what is the respiratory organ of some animals living on land? Already you know this. It's called the lungs. So like humans, rabbits, and frogs, whenever they are on land. We're going to talk about frogs in the coming slides. So frogs that are on land, not in water. Because as you know, frogs, they are amphibians. We're going to talk about this in the coming slide. So pay attention. So when the respiratory organ is the lung, we're told that the animals, they have a special type of respiration. It's called pulmonary respiration. So whenever we have lungs as a respiratory organ, here we are talking about pulmonary respiration. What other animals respire on land but they lack the lungs? What do we call them? They are called insects. What do they use? Which respiratory organ? They use the trachea, and they have special type of respiration. These animals that breathe using their trachea, they have a special type of respiration which is called tracheal respiration. So as a conclusion, the insects, they have the trachea. So whenever they have trachea as respiratory organ, we call them they have tracheal respiration. While those that have lungs as respiratory organ, we call them pulmonary respiration. The gas will exchange in trachea. Oxygen gas will diffuse from where to where? From the trachea that's rich in oxygen directly to the different organs. Here we're talking about tracheal respiration, mainly in insects. So oxygen gas diffuses from the trachea, that is rich in oxygen, directly toward the organs that are poor in oxygen gas. Wherever carbon dioxide diffuses from organs that are rich in carbon dioxide to the trachea that's poor in carbon dioxide. Also, you have to study this one. It's very important whenever we ask about the gaseous exchange in trachea. Also, all of them, they are talking about diffusion. So pay attention to this word. It's very important. Diffusion. So oxygen gas, it diffuses from the trachea that's rich in oxygen to a medium containing low amount of oxygen, which are the organs, whereas carbon dioxide diffuses from the organs that are rich in carbon dioxide to the trachea that are poor in carbon dioxide. So here in earthworms, we know that the earthworms, they have the skin as the respiratory organ. So here, earthworms, they have a special type of respiration. It's called cutaneous respiration. So cutaneous respiration, since the respiratory organ is the skin. So till now, we have three different types of respiration. First one, it was the pulmonary respiration, whenever we have the lungs as a respiratory organ. Tracheal respiration, whenever we have the trachea as a respiratory organ. And cutaneous respiration in the earthworms, whenever we have the skin as a respiratory organ. Now, let's move to talk about the fish. What is the respiratory organ of fish living in water? Sure, the gills. The gills, they are the respiratory organ. Each gill consists of two layers containing numerous gill filaments. These are the gill filaments that have very thin wall and they are rich in blood vessels. Why? To carry the respiratory gases. So why there are so many blood vessels? In order to carry the respiratory gases. And what happens when it reaches the gills? We're going to answer this. So here, the mouth and the process at the level of respiration. The fish. First, the water enters the mouth. Then, what will happen? Water entering the mouth is rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. Sure, when they take, fish take the water that's rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. Then, number 3, water will reach the gills. Whenever it reaches the gills, blood vessels, they are very poor in oxygen and they are rich in carbon dioxide. So then oxygen diffuse from the water that is rich in oxygen to the blood in the gills that is poor in oxygen. Whereas carbon dioxide will diffuse from the gills that are rich in carbon dioxide to the water that is poor in carbon dioxide. So then water will leave through the operculum. Remember when we talk about the operculum. So water leaving is poor in oxygen and rich in carbon dioxide. While the water entering, it was rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. So the fish consumes all the oxygen and released the carbon dioxide. This is the answer. What happens to the water when it reaches the gills? Here we want to write a short text to explain the gas exchange during respiration in the fish. First, the water enters the mouth. Water is rich in oxygen and poor in carbon dioxide. Then water reaches the gills, where the blood vessels, they are poor in oxygen and they are rich in carbon dioxide. Number 3, oxygen will diffuse from where? From a medium that contains high amount of oxygen, which is the water, to the blood in the gills that are poor in oxygen, while carbon dioxide will diffuse in the opposite direction, from the blood that is rich in carbon dioxide to the water that is poor in carbon dioxide. This is step number 3. Step number 4, water leave the operculum, while this water leaving will be poor in oxygen and rich in carbon dioxide. These ones you have to study them, you have to study and you have to know the process of the gas exchange during respiration in a fish. You have to know the 4 steps. Water enters first, water enters the mouth. Second step, you have to know that water reaches the gills. These gills where the blood that is poor in oxygen and rich in carbon dioxide. Number 3, oxygen gas will diffuse from the water that is rich in oxygen to the blood that is found in the gills, which is poor in oxygen, while carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood that is rich in carbon dioxide in the gills, sure, to the water that is poor in carbon dioxide. Finally, the water will leave through the operculum and this water will be poor in oxygen since the oxygen gas is consumed by the fish and is going to be rich in carbon dioxide since it was diffused by the fish. So under the water, frogs, they respire through their skin, while on land, remember when I told you, focus and pay attention, we're going to talk about the frogs. Frogs on land, they use what's known by their lungs. So they use their lungs whenever they are on land. So on land, they have pulmonary respiration, while underwater, frogs, they respire through their skin. So this skin becomes the respiratory organ. So what do they have under the water? They have cutaneous respiration, while on land they have pulmonary. So this figure is showing the frog, which is an amphibian. What the meaning of amphibian? Amphibian, the animal that lives both on land and under the water. So on land, it has pulmonary respiration, where the lungs, they are the respiratory organ, while under the water or in water, it has cutaneous respiration. What the meaning of cutaneous? They use their skin. So the skin becomes the respiratory organ. So here the fish has both cutaneous respiration in water, and on land it has pulmonary respiration. Okay, thank you guys. Study well these notes before our session. Thank you. Bye bye.